Well, we're really glad to be back with you again today. We are in the Gospel of Mark. We're looking at chapter 8, that first portion of the book. I hope that the stories we look at today will be a deep personal blessing for you. I want to go to our picture that we have today. This is really quite a lovely old home, I suppose, in 1888 when it was built. You would call this a mansion in its day. I also know this building personally because I have gone through and refinished the front windows and the little gable up on the top and replaced quite a bit of the front fascia board on that as just one of my projects quite a number of years ago. So Sherry took this picture recently, so I'm sure it's been touched up since then. So, Sherry, again, thank you for just this moment in history. One of those stately homes. I hope you enjoyed that. So, let's jump into our story. The Gospel of Mark, Jesus and Compassion is our title. And let's just pause here for a moment. Now, in chapter 8, there are several important stories about faith and its impact and how it plays out in the lives of the characters in each of the stories. What I encourage you to think about is if I were able to put myself in this story, if I was sitting in that boat, if I were part of the great multitude that is recorded in this, how would I see the disciples? What would I think of the words of Jesus? So if we can put ourselves in the story, it makes it much more personal. Now, Mark sets these stories up so that we learn something really important about ourselves or important things we learn about others. And I kind of think both of those things are true in what we're going to be talking about today. So before we get into our story, I also want to tell you that Mark witnessed another great crowd, about 4,000 men. Now, what do I mean by that? That when they did census, they only counted the men. So when they say there were 4,000 in attendance, that does not include women or children. So here's this great crowd that for 3 days listened to Jesus' teaching and the healings he did. But more importantly, it is a story about the miracle of food. In fact, the word manna in the Old Testament might come to mind when you read this story. And in addition, the compassion of Jesus was always a manifestation of his divinity. And you're going to see that in this story. And I think in a very profound and, may I say, miraculous way. So here we begin, Mark chapter 8, verse 1. In those days, when there was again a large crowd, and they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples, and he said to them, I feel compassion for the people because they have remained with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. Now I want you to think about this. That means that for whatever period throughout the course of the day Jesus is teaching, then they are finding a place to sleep. They rise up in the morning, gather together, and listen to Jesus again. Maybe some of them had brought things to snack on. Maybe there's a few things that they had to eat. But listen to what Jesus says. I feel compassion for the people because they've remained with me now 3 days. And he's saying they have nothing to eat. So if they had something, it's gone. Maybe they have been 3 days, some of them, but they are being filled spiritually. Don't miss that point. That's why they didn't go home and make a sandwich. Verse 3, if I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way. And some of them have come from a great distance. Now, just think about the spiritual gift of hospitality. Think about the tenderness and the consideration that is natural coming out of Christ, looking at the men, women, and children that have come to be blessed. They are being fed in a very wonderful and very profound way. Now let's go to the disciples. Verse 4. And his disciples answered him, where will anyone be able to find enough bread here in this desolate place to satisfy these people? Does this sound a little bit familiar? I mean, this isn't the first big multitude that Jesus has found that they were in need of more than just spiritual bread. They were in need of physical bread. And notice that the disciples from their previous experience are not carrying anything over into this current conversation. Where will anyone be able to find enough bread? Is their response. Because we're out in the middle of nowhere. Now, how are the disciples doing in their spiritual growth? How are they doing in their personal understanding of who Jesus is? And more than that, what he is able or capable of doing. I mean, it's like, has none of this really stuck in their mind? Now, we think that if you and I were there, that somehow we might be smarter, or somehow we might catch on sooner. But maybe we are not so different. Think about our own Christianity today. How much about the truth of Jesus do we still not fully recognize and do not fully understand? Maybe we have more in common with the disciples than maybe we want to admit. It says in verse 5, and he was asking them, how many loaves do you have? And this time, notice that they give an immediate response. They say, we have 7. Now, 7 loaves is also an interesting number. Make note of the number 7, because there's 7 days in creation. And the question is, who is the creator? Read John chapter 1, verses 1 through 12. If you are in doubt about who the creator is, the Gospel of John records for us who the creator is. And 7 is a significant number for the multitude. To go back to the Exodus story and think about the manna, to go back to the creation story and think of the 7 days of creation. This is an important aspect of the story. In verse 6, it says that Jesus directed the people to sit down on the ground. And Mark, again, I want to say Mark is an eyewitness to this. He's not giving you something secondhand. He's telling you exactly what he has seen. So sitting down and taking the 7 loaves, Jesus gave thanks and broke them and started giving them to his disciples to serve the people, and they served them to the people. So here's this bread now being dispersed throughout the multitude. Now remember, there might be as many as 6,000 people there. Even if it was only 4,000, that is a tremendous crowd. How many times have you had 4,000 people over for lunch at your house? So understand that this is a significant impact. Now it says in verse 7, they also had a few small fish, and after he had blessed them, he ordered these to be served as well. Just a few to 4,000 people. Something has to be happening to the bread. Something has to be happening to the fish in order to reach the hands and feed this huge multitude. Now, let's take a break here for a moment. Think about what the disciples are witnessing. Jesus takes a loaf of bread in his hands, and as he breaks it, the bread just begins to manifest out of his hands as he fills basket after basket after basket. He takes, let's say, a few fish, and I don't know what a few is. It could be 10, it could be a dozen, it could be 8. But as he breaks, most likely a dried fish, as he breaks that fish and distributes it, that fish is appearing in his hands. Just like Jesus can speak and someone can be healed or forgiven, or he can touch and a person is made whole, he can also multiply bread and fish by simply touching it with his hands. And if you were a witness to this the first time, now you're witnessing it again. Would you not begin to acknowledge something significant and something profound? Now, how successful was Jesus at doing this? It says in verse 8, "And they ate and were satisfied." Now, I've been to a lot of public meals and luncheons, things called potlucks over the years. I couldn't even count how many I have been to. I have never witnessed what this story has said. But if I had witnessed it, I would like to think for a moment that this would stick in my mind, that not only was Jesus doing this, they weren't getting 2 or 3 bites. They ate and were satisfied. More than that, they picked up 7 large baskets of what was left over of what? The broken pieces. Now, just do the math on that. They ate until they were satisfied. It reminds me of my grandmother. Now here, have some more of this. Here, have some more of this. Her main concern with her gift of hospitality, if you were a guest in her home, did you have enough? Were you satisfied? And imagine starting with just 7 loaves and a few fish. Now you have 7 baskets left over. Is this not an extraordinary story? Now, about 4,000 were there, and he sent them away. He said, "It's time for you to go home." Again, that count did not include the women, and it did not include the children. Now, Mark is not known to make things up that he had not seen. So he's giving his personal account, and he's not the only one. These stories are recorded in the other Gospels as well. There's multiple witnesses to these stories. And that implies that for you and I at this point in the story, have a choice. Are we willing to accept them by faith? That these men recorded exactly what they saw. And it was a profound moment in their life that would impact them every single day for the rest of their time. In verse 10, we have Mark's favorite word, the word immediately, used over 50 times. It says, "And immediately he entered the boat with his disciples and came to the district of Dalmanutha. And the Pharisees came out and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him." Now, notice the reason they wanted the sign. They didn't want a sign to prove to them. They wanted a sign to test him. Now, at times you have to look at the story and ask who's in charge. Are the Pharisees in charge, or is Jesus in charge? Secondly, at this point in the story, you may want to ask this question. If Jesus passed the test, would they have been convinced? Now, I want to tell you something I find really interesting about Jewish theology. We did a film screening on Rabbi Abraham Heschel, and what was really amazing about that is they went into one of the Jewish seminaries there in New York, and the young scholars would get together in twos or threes, and they would each choose a side, and they would have these intense discussions. Um, you could say they were having an argument, but I would disagree. Um, they were having an intense discussion, and each one taking a side, and the outcome strengthened their depth of belief. It is really an amazing thing. But in this story, the Pharisees came out, and it reads, let me read it to you again, and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven. And they wanted to test him. Verse 12, how does Jesus respond to this? Sighing deeply in his spirit. I mean, I can almost hear him go, oh. Then he speaks, and Mark records, why does this generation seek for a sign? Truly, I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation. In other words, he said, you are not in charge here. I am the one who is demonstrating and giving you this evidence, and no sign will be given to this generation. Now, to which generation is he speaking? Think about the 4,000. And think about the Pharisees. Is he speaking to this generation of spiritual leaders because of their skepticism and their refusal to see what is right in front of them? Listen, every miracle Jesus performed, every healing, every person restored was a sign of exactly who Jesus was. There was not a sign given that would change their minds, because the scribes and the Pharisees and the doubters saw almost everything that Mark has recorded. This wasn't done behind the door. These things were done out in public. That speaks to something I think is important today. Today there is a desire for more miracles in the churches, in Christianity. Some churches even create spectacular events to make church seem more spirit-filled. But what would Jesus say to them? I mean, I have heard stories of manifestations of spirits in churches that actually give you goosebumps, but they don't convince you really it was Jesus, because there is such a hype given into the worship service. Things begin to be seen and happen. But what did Jesus say? There will not be a sign to this generation. If you have to have a sign for your faith to be real, it works the other way around. You accept by faith, and what Jesus does in you becomes real. The greatest sign that could ever be registered intellectually in the mind of a human being would be the full transformation of a new heart and a new mind that is accepted by faith in Jesus Christ. I think we're challenged with what Jesus would say if he came to contemporary Christianity today. I think we would see it differently. In verse 13, leaving them, he again embarked and went away to the other side. He goes to the other side of the lake. And now, in the boat, a conversation I want you to pay careful attention to. It says, and they had forgotten to take bread and did not have more than one loaf in the boat with them. They had forgotten to take bread. How many? Maybe they'd eaten all those 7 baskets, I don't know. But they just had one loaf in the boat. Now, If I was in that boat, I would say, "Hey guys, maybe this loaf is only 6 inches across, okay?" I would, by faith, just hand it to Jesus and say, "Would you mind breaking bread with us today?" Expecting a miracle. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if you would do that. But if they just had one in the boat with them, who was able to take 7 loaves and feed more than 4,000? There has to be a moment of amusement here. And he was giving orders to them saying, "Watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." So here they are carrying on in the boat, and what is Jesus doing? He's warning them. The leaven of sin. Leaven represented sin in Jewish culture, distrust, a resistance to the truth, and a lack of faith. The leaven of sin. This is simply unbelief that Jesus was warning his very own disciples about. And they begin to discuss with one another the fact that they had no bread. I call this distracted disciples, and they are very conflicted. "John, it's your fault. Mark, why didn't you?" They're just carrying on like, as my mother would say, a bunch of yahoos. Verse 17, Jesus was aware of this and said to them, "Why do you discuss the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet see or understand?" Remember, the Gospel of Mark is like the last guys to get the point of who Jesus is right now are the men who are sitting at his feet, learning and witnessing what Jesus has done every single day. But then don't miss that last sentence. Do you have a hardened heart? Now, pay attention carefully to what Jesus says. It's in capital letters. I just took this right out of the Bible. I did not capitalize these words. That means that these are emphasized in the original Greek. And here's how Mark writes the words of Jesus. Speaking to the disciples, Jesus says, "Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember?" Now that phrase up above in bold, in capital letters, this is the Old Testament definition of what a rebellious heart is. Not to mention they're plain ignorance here. It's almost like they are absolutely without an excuse. You would think the disciples would be deeply shocked and offended, Jesus calling them rebellious. But he has more to say. "When I broke 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you pick up?" And they said to him, 12. 12 disciples, 12 tribes, 12 loaves of bread in the sanctuary. That's a significant number. A number that spoke to them. Verse 20. "When I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets of broken pieces did you pick up?" And they said to him, 7. And he was saying to them, "Do you not yet understand?" They are slow to understand. They are slow to know who Jesus is. Look, the disciples failed to understand why Jesus would not give a sign to the Pharisees. And this opened the door to unbelief to them. This clearly tells us that the signs witnessed by the disciples, including Mark, was not evidence enough for them. Are you and I any different? Are we that different? How many lives have you seen radically changed by inviting Jesus into the heart and into the life? And yet, at times, we're still skeptics. We still doubt his ability and his power to transform our hearts and our minds. So we look at these disciples, and I hope that we feel closer to them instead of condemning them. The greatest evidence of Christ's power today, greater than any miracle he performed, is the power of God to transform a person by faith in Jesus, to transform your life. Your transformed life is the greatest witness one can possibly have. It's a miracle. That miraculous divine power is freely available to every single person on this earth. Think of it another way. It's available to your neighbor. It's available to your children, your children's children. It's available to the folks who work down at the grocery store. It's available to your coworkers. That miraculous divine power of Christ in you, the hope of glory, received by faith alone in Jesus Christ, is freely available to every single person on this earth. And that is a sign of signs. That is the ultimate sign. That is the ultimate miracle today. That's what Jesus gave the church to show to the world as a testimony, as the evidence of his power in his church, is your changed life and mine. I want to go to our picture. This is one of those beautiful pictures that Sherry just happens to take. And Sherry, thank you for this moment. I hope you have an awesome rest of your day. Take a moment and reflect on who Jesus is. Thank you so much. Take care now.